men were amiable. They let me stay. They understood. I explained that I didn't tell them we were reporting live from this hotel room, but I did say that we had been invited by the Minister of Information to witness what was going on here, and they accepted that explanation. 1 minute, please.
Here we go. I'm just looking out the window. The security people have forced us to close our windows. And maybe it's for our own good, maybe not. We don't know whether these windows are going to shatter under blasts or not. But there's some beautiful tracer fire outside now. It's way up in the air. It's bright red blasts and yellow blasts. And with the windows closed, we can't hear as well as we were able to hear before. But, you know, it continues to go on outside now. We don't, because we can't hear as well, we can't really tell you as much about what's going on as we would have been able to with the window open. Well, these security fellows also took some of the videotape out of one of our cameras. They say we'll get it back tomorrow. I'm a little skeptical that we will, but it was the beautiful pictures that we took to go along with the commentary that you heard earlier tonight on CNN.
You keep using that word, beautiful. This is not beautiful to me. Peter, you were being modest when you told viewers, you explained that you had the permission of the Interior, the Information Ministry. Ladies and gentlemen, you should have heard this masterful performance. I was in the other room on the floor under the table, and this Peter Arnett man said to the security guy, I spent 10 years in Vietnam. The bombs outside, they don't bother me. If I go down in the shelter, I go crazy. It was quite a performance, and he timed them.
That's right.
All right, Bertie and Peter and John, we'll be back to you. Thanks for that report. We're going now to Charles Jaco, who has been reporting to us from Tehran, Saudi Arabia. Charles?
Yes, another false alarm, apparently. The air raid sirens went off here. We were led to believe it was some sort of air raid alert, either a missile alert or an air raid attack. We've stayed out here, losing phone lines, getting them back. What we can see is behind us, I don't know if you can see them, the lights of the city are on. It's rather unusual for a city that might be thought to be under attack, but the city is still brightly lit around the air bases here. There's no sign that the city is hunkered down or blacked out at all. Air raid sirens did sound. They sounded for a couple of minutes, then went off. Then the alarms here at the hotel went off, telling everyone to don their gas masks. All of us carry these now, and to get downstairs. Again, that it was apparently a false alarm. What we know, again, we can repeat. We heard earlier from Saudi military sources, which is that the first one was a false alarm. Apparently, this one was a false alarm. It was a national air raid alert. The last we heard from the Saudi military, and we say Saudi military because no information has been forthcoming here from U.S. military sources, is that the airstrikes against Iraq by Allied air forces, primarily the U.S. Air Force, have been massive, and they kept emphasizing that word, massive, and that they have detected no retaliation, either missile or jet, against Saudi Arabia from that. The Saudis are still obviously on pins and needles. They've been living in a state of high war alert since early August and are very understandably nervous and concerned about what might happen. But so far, everyone here in Tehran is safe, and there have been no problems except for bad cases of jangled nerves and scrambles down to the hotel basement into the shelter and putting on the gas mask. But all we can tell you right now is that apparently the attack was underway. It was massive, and so far at least, and this is our information as of about 20 minutes ago, so far, no retaliation, either missile or jet of any kind from Iraq, has been spotted. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia.
All right, Charles, we'll switch just a few miles away and go to Riyadh, I believe, and Don Sweeney. We're expecting a report from him. Come in.
The military personnel in Saudi Arabia have just learned officially from their commander that they are in fact involved in Operation Desert Storm. A communique from General Norman Schwarzkopf issued just a few moments ago. Part of it says to the members of the military, you are a member of the most powerful force of our country in coalition with our allies that has ever assembled in a single theater to face such an aggressor. Now you have trained hard for this battle, and you are ready. He goes on to say a bit later, our cause is just. Now you must be the thunder and lightning of Desert Storm. May God be with you, your loved ones at home, and our country. It's signed H. Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of the forces in Saudi Arabia. This is John Sweeney, CNN, in Riyadh.
All right, John, any extraneous noises outside where you are? Is everything fine?
We had one air raid warning about an hour and a half ago. We have not heard anything since then. The traffic in the streets is quite early in the morning here. It's 4:45 in the morning. The traffic in the street is quite normal. And other than that, things are quite quiet in Riyadh.
Right, thank you very much. And now a moniker that I hope doesn't stick. Let's go back to the boys in Baghdad.
Thank you, David. The boys in Baghdad are here. And we want to tell you a couple of things. There have been calls we've learned from CNN, from other networks, asking about the safety of their people. There are 45 journalists still in Baghdad tonight, according to the Minister of Information. And as far as we know, all those 45 journalists are in this hotel, and everybody in this hotel is safe. It hasn't been hit. There's a series of fallout, or not, bomb shelters down in the basement. And virtually everybody except us is down there in those shelters. Bernie?
John, I made the trek downstairs into the bomb shelter and then came back upstairs. And indeed, all the journalists who were in this hotel when it happened, and most of them were because there had been a series of staff meetings, they are safe downstairs in the bomb shelter. No one is being permitted outside the hotel. I know for a fact, CBS News, if you're wondering, I saw with my own two eyes Larry Doyle, and we go way back to our days at CBS in Washington. He's fine. I saw Alan Pizzi. He was sitting on the floor sipping a glass of something. He seemed quite content. And there's a young thin chap who said he worked for CBS. I think he does radio. He's fine. Everybody is safe. We know you're worried about us, and we're concerned about ourselves, but everybody is safe. Peter, you look like you want to say something.
I simply want to say, Bernie, that this lull has lasted about 25 minutes now. No aircraft fire, no bombing. So it looks like this first phase is over, and we'll get back to you when it all starts again.
Okay, thanks, Peter Arnett. John Holliman, do you want to say anything before we throw it back to our colleagues?
I just want to look out the window one last time and make sure that it is as quiet as it seems to us. There are a few air bursts out here, but there's no anti-aircraft. I mean, there's nothing loud and noisy that we're hearing, and we don't feel any vibrations from outside. So I think it's probably safe for us to let the rest of the network broadcast a little bit tonight. From Baghdad, for Peter Arnett and Bernard Shaw, it's John Holliman. We'll be here if you need us.
Compelling reporting, gentlemen. Thank you very much. It's coming up on 5 o'clock in the morning in Baghdad, and behind that, not too far, will be light. President Bush is going to address the nation shortly, within 12 or 13 minutes, and the lull that they're talking about having lasted 25 minutes may well continue until that is over. Also, we're expecting a briefing from the Secretary of Defense and Joint Chiefs Chairman Colin Powell at the Pentagon following the President's remarks. Now let's go to Norfolk, Virginia. An awful lot of ships carrying the planes that were in the air over Baghdad sailed out of Norfolk. Tom Mentier is there with those who stayed behind and with this report.
There are 35,000 Navy servicemen that have departed from Norfolk for the Persian Gulf. We are at the First Baptist Church of Norfolk, where just a few moments ago the Reverend here made the announcement to a packed congregation. There was a concert going on inside. Joining us is Colleen Jackson. Colleen, your husband, Kevin, is Lieutenant Commander, and he is aboard the Saratoga. Tell me what thoughts went through your mind as the Reverend made the announcement. Did you think it would come tonight?
No, I didn't think it would come tonight, and I didn't think it would hit quite so hard. I knew that there were airplanes launched. I don't know if he's one of them. I'm scared. I can't think of a better place to have been tonight than to have been in church.
The church has a support system where they will contact everyone and make sure that people are not alone who are members of this church. Is it a good system? Does it help?
Yes, it does help, and I have my own support system of my friends from this church. They're making sure that no one will be alone tonight. They're making sure that everyone that needs to have a support, a shoulder to cry on, a friend to pray with. They're just the most wonderful people to be associated with right now.
Will you watch the President tonight?
Yes, I probably will, just to see if there's any information that I can find at all about what's happening with my husband and with the men in his squadron.
If you could talk to the President right now, what message would you send to him?
That I believe in him, that I'm praying for him, and to just bring our men home as quickly and safely as he possibly can.
Colleen Jackson, thank you very much. I know this is a very difficult time for you. Thank you. So it is one of the Navy wives, and there are 35,000 of them here in Norfolk, Virginia tonight. They're all waiting for some type of word. I'm Tom Intier, CNN, reporting live from Norfolk, Virginia.
Thanks, Tom. They, too, are among the brave, of course, all across this nation. Let's return now to Baghdad and our three correspondents.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we're here, and it's very quiet outside. There still are an occasional flash of light off to the south of our location, far in the distance. There have been no big blasts in the recent past. No signs of anti-aircraft fire right now. No sounds of jets overhead. It's an eerie stillness that we talked about earlier in the day. Bernie Shaw's here now.
I just want to make this observation. The President of the United States is coming up to address his nation and the world very shortly. And that we are on the air means that the government of Iraq, its ears are wide open, and it will be listening to President Bush very closely. We told you earlier in the week that the Information Ministry had received its own satellite dish, and prior to that, the Foreign Ministry had it. We've got to run. Somebody's knocking on the door. John and I are going to hide. Peter, here.
This is Peter Arnett signing off for a minute, and I'll see what the action is outside.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. We assume that's not the full brush salesman. Let's go to Robert Zito. He's standing by now on the west coast of the United States at San Diego, another important naval base. Robert.
Well, I'm at an apartment complex in San Diego, and I've spent the last few hours with several wives whose husbands are serving aboard ships in the Persian Gulf. And we've all been glued to the television set watching CNN, mesmerized by what we've seen and by what we've heard. And it's been an emotional time for these ladies as they held hands and they prayed and had these feelings that I'll let them tell you about. Denise, what was your feeling, your reaction as you watched the events unfold?
I was scared, frightened for my husband, for the guys on his ship, and for the Iraqi people, because it's come to this, you know. This crazy man has brought us this far. I back my husband up. I'm very proud of what he does and who he is and where he's at right now. But I'm also scared because I want him home.
If you had a moment to talk to the president, what would you say to him, the president of the United States?
To get it done and over with as quickly as possible. I'd like to see Saddam Hussein brought in front of the UN Council and tried. That's the way I feel about it. This man shouldn't be walking free. I think he ought to be tried for what he's done and what he's put the Iraqi people as well as the United States and all the countries that are over there through.
Thank you, Denise. Kay, could you just come up? Kay Hunter is a lady who a lot of the wives who have husbands on ships lean on for support and help. What are your feelings?
I am very, very deeply concerned for all the people over there. We have to be strong together because it's our strength and our support of one another that is going to get us through this. And it's because of this group here and lots of groups like this all over the United States with the parents and the wives and the children that are going to help the families get through this. And we are here and we love them all, and we're 1,000% behind the military. And Mr. Bush, get them over there and get it over with and get our husbands home.
Thank you. I know these are tough times. I'm going to ask Charlotte. Charlotte, could you just come over here and just share a moment with us and tell me your thoughts?
I'm very upset right now, of course, but I back up my husband 100%. I just want it over with and send him home.
Did you support the action?
I feel that they did what they had to do. And I feel sorry for all the people over there that lives are going to be lost. And I think Hassan should have to pay for this. I think he should not get away with what has happened here.
Thank you, Charlotte, for sharing your thoughts with us. So the feeling here is, of course, like elsewhere, that the war will be over soon. Robert Vito reporting live from San Diego.
Bye. Shortly, I'd like to point out first that a senior administration official has told CNN that no ground attack has occurred at this point. We repeat, no ground attack is underway. Australian warships have been authorized, 3 of them to assist in the multinational force arrayed against Iraq to free Kuwait. The mission of President Bush tonight, which he will address the nation on in less than 5 minutes, is simply to free Kuwait. Let's go now to Doug James and get his report from Amman. Doug.
We understand that Jordan's King Hussein is currently, like many other people, watching CNN to see the latest developments from Iraq and Kuwait. So far, the people here have been told very little. There was a radio announcement approximately 1 hour ago giving them the bare details. They'll have to wait until 10 o'clock local time in the morning to get more information. With us at the moment is Kamal Abu Jabbar, a Middle East expert who's been following the Gulf crisis from the very beginning. And I wonder, sir, what you think is going through King Hussein's mind at this very moment?
I think what's going through his head right now is sadness and a terrible shock that in the final analysis something could not have been worked out in a decent way. That while President Bush is speaking about free Kuwait, why can't he speak about free Palestine? And I think that is what is going through his mind at this moment.
Would he have been taken by surprise, as many others have, with the nature of the attack this evening, the quickness of the attack this evening?
Yes, I think so, very much so. I don't think anybody in the whole world, anybody in his right mind expected this kind of reaction by the United States. I still believe that there was room for talk, and I am puzzled, like I'm sure His Majesty is puzzled at this moment. Why couldn't the United States have talked to Iraq in a meaningful and in a human manner?
What reaction do you think he'll have tomorrow? Will he have more to say in the morning?
His Majesty, yes, of course he will have to say. I'm sure of that, yes.
As you know, the country is in the middle of Iraq and Israel. This must be a primary concern of his at the moment.
Of course. I mean, you know, we have the Israeli army to our west that is armed to the teeth with all kinds of ugly weapons and willing and ready to use them at any moment.
Thank you very much, sir. This is Doug James reporting live from Amman, Jordan.
Thank you, Doug. The president is going to speak in about 3.5 minutes. We return now to Baghdad and our 3 correspondents there until then. Bernie Shaw.
David, I just want to explain to you and our viewers what happened. There was a knock at the door, and we had to scramble. I had to go to my hiding position under the table, but we're back here, and we're standing by. I had indicated that, in my opinion, we will be watching very closely and listening to what the president has to say. I was reporting that the information and foreign ministries can receive CNN. They will be watching and listening. And Peter Arnett, John Holliman, I'm going to be listening for signals from the President of the United States to Saddam Hussein.
One more thing before we go to the president. We just had another fairly loud blast on the outside, which was visible as a white flash in our windows. We'll stay here, and after the president's done, we'll give you an update on what happened while he was speaking. Peter? No, okay, we'll go back to Atlanta now.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. We will be back to you. Perhaps another wave beginning. We have been informed that there will be more, possibly more air attacks tonight. The president's about to speak to the nation, and let's go to the White House and our senior correspondent, Charles Bierbauer. Well, he'll be with us shortly. The president has been described earlier this evening as expectant but calm and resolute, and he has said that this mission is to free Kuwait. Charles is ready now. Charles, come in.
David, President Bush, as you indicate very shortly, the speech anticipated. Perhaps we will get a little more detail as to just what it is that he has set in motion here. We know that he has been in contact with a number of his allies in this mission. One of them, the Australian Prime Minister, Mr. Hawke, has indicated he's received a call and ordered Australian ships to go into action as well. We do not have broad detail yet as to just how international this operation may be. I have heard some reports that the British are involved on the Kuwaiti side of the equation. Perhaps we will get more detail, actually more likely out of the Pentagon on that. President Bush, in the speech that he's been working on himself for the past 2 to 3 weeks, in fact, probably going back to his Christmas holiday up at Camp David, where he pretty much formulated his ideas and his final decisions on what he was going to do. We will hear an address of about 10 to 12 minutes in length, and as I say, it's one that we were told that he has worked on and pretty much written himself. David?
I heard, Charles, that there were actually 4 drafts, that a lot of thought has gone into this speech, and it is a delicate one. Perhaps it is one of the continuing diplomacy that was cut off by what he called the stiff arm from Saddam Hussein. Incidentally, Charles, we can hear some voices in the background behind you. Are the demonstrators still there?
There are still demonstrators in Lafayette Park, as there have been for the past several days. They have grown and diminished in numbers throughout the days, and as the weather got better and got worse, but there has been something of a constant vigil over there. It is within earshot if the president is normally listening, or if he's outside, as he has been on a couple of occasions. We do not know if they will have the opportunity that we will have to hear the president now.
All right, Charles, we go live to the Oval Office.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Ground forces are not engaged. This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor. Kuwait, a member of the Arab League and a member of the United Nations, was crushed. Its people brutalized. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined. This military action, taken in accord with United Nations resolutions and with the consent of the United States Congress, follows months of constant and virtually endless diplomatic activity on the part of the United Nations, the United States, and many, many other countries. Arab leaders sought what became known as an Arab solution, only to conclude that Saddam Hussein was unwilling to leave Kuwait. Others traveled to Baghdad in a variety of efforts to restore peace and justice. Our Secretary of State, James Baker, held an historic meeting in Geneva, only to be totally rebuffed. This past weekend, in a last-ditch effort, the Secretary General of the United Nations went to the Middle East with peace in his heart, his second such mission, and he came back from Baghdad with no progress at all in getting Saddam Hussein to withdraw from Kuwait. Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal. Initial reports from General Schwarzkopf are that our operations are proceeding according to plan. Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free. Iraq will eventually comply with all relevant United Nations resolutions, and then, when peace is restored, it is our hope that Iraq will live as a peaceful and cooperative member of the family of nations, thus enhancing the security and stability of the Gulf. Some may ask, why act now? Why not wait? The answer is clear. The world could wait no longer. Sanctions, though having some effect, showed no signs of accomplishing their objective. Sanctions were tried for well over 5 months, and we and our allies concluded that sanctions alone would not force Saddam from Kuwait. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein systematically raped, pillaged, and plundered a tiny nation, no threat to his own. He subjected the people of Kuwait to unspeakable atrocities, and among those maimed and murdered, innocent children. While the world waited, Saddam sought to add to the chemical weapons arsenal he now possesses an infinitely more dangerous weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear weapon. And while the world waited, While the world talked peace and withdrawal, Saddam Hussein dug in and moved massive forces into Kuwait. While the world waited, while Saddam stalled, more damage was being done to the fragile economies of the Third World, the emerging democracies of Eastern Europe, to the entire world, including to our own economy. The United States, together with the United Nations, exhausted every means at our disposal to bring this crisis to a peaceful end. However, Saddam clearly felt that by stalling and threatening and defying the United Nations, he could weaken the forces arrayed against him. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein met every overture of peace with open contempt. While the world prayed for peace, Saddam prepared for war. I had hoped that when the United States Congress, in historic debate, took its resolute action, Saddam would realize he could not prevail and would move out of Kuwait in accord with the United Nations resolutions. He did not do that. Instead, he remained intransigent, certain that time was on his side. Saddam was warned over and over again to comply with the will of the United Nations, leave Kuwait or be driven out. Saddam has arrogantly rejected all warnings. Instead, he tried to make this a dispute between Iraq and the United States of America. Well, he failed. Tonight, 28 nations, countries from 5 continents, Europe and Asia, Africa and the Arab League, have forces in the Gulf area standing shoulder to shoulder against Saddam Hussein. These countries had hoped the use of force could be avoided. Regrettably, we now believe that only force will make him leave. Prior to ordering our forces into battle, I instructed our military commanders to take every necessary step to prevail as quickly as possible and with the greatest degree of protection possible for American and Allied servicemen and women. I've told the American people before that this will not be another Vietnam. And I repeat this here tonight. Our troops will have the best possible support in the entire world, and they will not be asked to fight with one hand tied behind their back. I'm hopeful that this fighting will not go on for long, and that casualties will be held to an absolute minimum. This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. We have no argument with the people of Iraq. Indeed, for the innocents caught in this conflict, I pray for their safety. Our goal is not the conquest of Iraq. It is the liberation of Kuwait. It is my hope that somehow the Iraqi people can, even now, convince their dictator that he must lay down his arms, leave Kuwait, and let Iraq itself rejoin the family of peace-loving nations. Thomas Paine wrote many years ago, "These are the times that try men's souls." Those well-known words are so very true today. But even as planes of the multinational forces attack Iraq, I prefer to think of peace, not war. I am convinced not only that we will prevail, but that out of the horror of combat will come the recognition that no nation can stand against a world united. No nation will be permitted to brutally assault its neighbor. No president can easily commit our sons and daughters to war. They are the nation's finest. Ours is an all-volunteer force, magnificently trained, highly motivated. The troops know why they're there, and listen to what they say, for they've said it better than any president or prime minister ever could. Listen to Hollywood Huddleston, Marine Lance Corporal. He says, let's free these people so we can go home and be free again. He's right. The terrible crimes and tortures committed by Saddam's henchmen against the innocent people of Kuwait are an affront to mankind and a challenge to the freedom of all. Listen to one of our great officers out there, Marine Lieutenant General Walter Boomer. He said, there are things worth fighting for. A world in which brutality and lawlessness are allowed to go unchecked isn't the kind of world we're going to want to live in. Listen to Master Sergeant J.P. Kendall of the 82nd Airborne. We're here for more than just the price of a gallon of gas. What we're doing is going to chart the future of the world for the next 100 years. It's better to deal with this guy now than 5 years from now. And finally, we should all sit up and listen to Jackie Jones, an Army lieutenant, when she says, if we let him get away with this, who knows what's going to be next? I've called upon Hollywood and Walter and J.P. and Jackie and all their courageous comrades in arms to do what must be done. Tonight, America and the world are deeply, deeply grateful to them and to their families. And let me say to everyone listening or watching tonight, when the troops we've sent in finish their work, I'm determined to bring them home as soon as possible. Tonight, as our forces fight, they and their families are in our prayers. May God bless each and every one of them and the coalition forces at our side in the Gulf, and may he continue to bless our nation, the United States of America.
President Bush, live from the Oval Office in a 12-minute address to the nation and the world, saying at the outset his minimal demands. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait and Iraq will comply with all relevant UN resolutions. Let's go now to Charles Jaco, who has word on airplanes in Saudi Arabia. Charles.
Yes, David. One high-ranking Saudi official has told us that he has been in touch with the highest levels in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. According to this information, he claims that all the planes from this first raid, Saudi and U.S. planes, have returned safely with no loss of planes and no loss of pilots. That's according to a high-ranking Saudi official here with contacts in Riyadh. King Fahd, the King of Saudi Arabia, is said to be meeting right now in Riyadh with members of his court and members of his government. I asked one Air Force officer here about the raid, how it went. Information was very hard to come by, but he would only tell me that the raid was, quote, more successful than we imagined, close quote. We can only imagine what that means. So the preliminary, and I must say these are preliminary indications we're getting here from a high-ranking Saudi official and an Air Force officer, is that the first wave of the raid on Iraq at least was successful, and that at least all the Saudi and United States planes have returned without any loss. David?
Saudi Arabia, thank you very much. The force may indeed be larger than we had been led to believe, and with word on that is our correspondent who covers world affairs for us, Ralph Begleiter. I'm sorry for that lapse. Ralph, what have you for us?
David, according to Saudi officials, the number of Saudi planes in the air tonight was 150, joining the American fighters. And according to the Saudis, the air attacks were much more extensive than merely Baghdad. We, of course, had our reporting only from Baghdad because of the limitations of coverage in Iraq. But according to these Saudi sources, the attacks were countrywide throughout Iraq. involved in the mission tonight, along with British and American forces. The Saudi sources also say that Saudi Ambassador Prince Bandar was here at the State Department this morning at 8 o'clock for a meeting with Secretary of State Baker, a very brief meeting, about 10 minutes long, during which Baker asked for the Saudi green light to go ahead with the attack today. Prince Bandar telephoned King Fahd from Baker's office itself, received the green light, gave it to Baker immediately. That was the prearranged signal that the United States and the Saudis had decided on in order to get the Saudi government on board for the attack. In fact, that was the language used by King Fahd. He said, "We are on board." In addition, we've learned that Israel was pre-notified of the attack as well through several channels. The Saudis here in the Soviets here in Washington say they were not informed through the embassy in Washington, but presume that direct channels between Washington and Moscow were utilized for pre-notification. David?
World Affairs correspondent Ralph Begleiter, thank you very much, reporting live from the State Department. Everyone wants us to go back to Baghdad, and so do I, where Bernard Shaw, Peter Arnett, and John Holliman have been reporting this dramatic evening. Gentlemen.
This is Bernie. We have listened to the President's address, and as he indicated in speaking, or while speaking, hostilities were going on, and indeed, we could see far off in the distance lights flashing. We could hear the bombs, and we could see the tracer fire from the anti-aircraft batteries. As I listened to President Bush tonight, it seemed to me that he was telling Saddam Hussein, you are going to quit Kuwait. But I also heard Peter Arnett and John Holliman an implied threat to this man that the forces have gone against the nuclear plant that was a building. The forces have gone against the chemical arsenals. But I heard the President saying that we might not stop here. He did declare that this was not an invasion of Iraq. He wants to cripple this man's military capability. I should also tell you that we do not know where President Saddam Hussein is at this moment, nor do we know where other members of his government are located. I'm going to pass the microphone around because each of my colleagues has something to contribute. John Holliman.
Bernie, I think you're right about the President's message to President Saddam Hussein. It's a message of, this is it, this is the beginning of what we're going to do. I'm sure the President would like very much if President Hussein would respond right away by, offering to pull out of Kuwait or something, but we'll have to wait and see what he's going to do later on. The last time we saw President Saddam Hussein was on television tonight in video that we know was at least a day old from a tour that he made of Kuwait. Excuse me. I'm now looking out the window of our bureau here, and I can tell you that off in the distance there continues to be the sounds of what appear to me to be bombs. During the President's message, there were flashes of light from a distance probably as much as 15 or 20 miles away, probably to the south of where we are. And at this moment, there are no signs of anti-aircraft fire in the downtown Baghdad area, but there continue to be these flashes of light off in the distance to the south. Peter Arnett, your reflections.
Yes, John, I couldn't help thinking as I heard the bombs, the distant bombs, punctuating President Bush's speech of his reference to Vietnam. This will not be another Vietnam. And I was thinking back to Vietnam, where I spent many years, to a similar raid in 1972, a B-52 strike on Hanoi. The interesting thing was that raid came at the end of the Vietnam War, near the end of the Vietnam War, and many say it helped end that war. This raid on Baghdad and elsewhere in this region tonight is at the beginning of this war, and maybe it certainly won't be a Vietnam. John?
Peter, while you were speaking, the sky lit up again with some more apparently chaff to fool Iraqi radar in the sky. There are bunches of groups of white lights and yellow lights that go through the sky and then blink out mysteriously, apparently designed to confuse the anti-aircraft guns. And at this point, the anti-aircraft guns are not firing, so if they're intended to confuse, they are not. The guns are not firing. Well, as I speak, off in the distance, I see some anti-aircraft fire is going up pretty far away from our location, and you might be able in the background to hear some of that out the window. Yeah, Bernie Shaw is back again, and then we want to talk to someone who's just come up from the shelters downstairs who will brief our loved ones about how things are there. Bernie.
Yes, I was just, Ingrid has been sitting here on the floor. I don't know how you managed to get past those guards and make that long hike up those 14 stories that I made about an hour ago. but what is the situation in the bomb shelter? And Ingrid, you know all of the members of the press corps, the other American networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, they've been highly concerned about their people. So take your time now and give us a fill on what the situation is in the bomb shelter.
Well, what you can see from up here, you can hear down in the shelter is low, very low and quiet thumps. There was a little bit of confusion at the beginning. The press went down there, other hotel guests, hotel employees who also live in a compound nearby. A number of mothers and their children at a certain time, perhaps half an hour after the attack started, you heard chants of down, down, Bush, so we even had a little demonstration down in the shelter. The interesting thing was that some of the government guys that accompany us during the day when we try and work, and some of the hotel security people are walking around with Kalashnikovs and gas masks, which is something that was a little bit of a surprise to see. And I did see a lot of our colleagues down there, some of them who had been up on higher floors taking pictures, and they were taken by security people downstairs to a shelter, ostensibly for our own protection. Bernie?
And what is the mood of the people in the shelter?
Well, it's actually quieted down a lot. The confusion has ceased. Some of the people have gone to sleep. There's still a lot of milling around. The people are trying to get the BBC or anything to know what's going on in the outside world. There's a lot of questions about what's going on in Kuwait, Jordan, Israel, other spots that may be involved, and people are very curious to come above ground, waiting for daylight just to see what has happened.
Even in the midst of these raids around Baghdad, life goes on, and as incredible as it sounded incredible to my ears, John Holliman, a rooster crowing about 20 minutes ago as the bombs were going off out there over the horizon. Very strange sound.
I'll say, Bernie, and it's a long time before sunrise here. It's still a couple of hours before we're going to see the first rays of sunlight off to the east. But this rooster was obviously confused by all the military hardware arrayed and displayed in the skies of Baghdad. Peter Arnett standing by to talk to us some more, but I'm just going to look out the window once before I give the microphone to Peter. You can still see flashes in the sky, but still, strangely, eerily, there are no fires, which is an indication. President Bush said in his speech that they were not attacking civilian targets here. They were attacking specific military targets, and it appears that's correct from everything we can observe from our window.
Yes, thank you, John. By my watch in this dim light of this hotel room, this these series of raids have been going on for about 2 hours and 50 minutes. They began at around 2:30 Baghdad time in the center of the city. The government installations or installations of one kind or another, maybe anti-aircraft, strategic communication centers, began in the center and stayed in this particular part of town for about an hour and a half, but they are moving outwards of a large perimeter. All around the horizon, we see explosions. There must have been scores and scores of raids that we have witnessed so far. Witnessed, when I say we witnessed, we've seen the flashes and we have seen the anti-aircraft fire going up. But it's obvious that these raids are continuing, and we can see the evidence of that. Here's Bernie Shore again.
Peter, I'm trying to clear my mind of everything to keep the chronology of events uppermost. And I am anticipating two things at daybreak. One is more a hope than an anticipation. We hope that, one, when it's safe to go outside, we can find somebody in authority in this government to talk to. We do not know where President Saddam Hussein is at this moment as these raids continue. The other thing I anticipate is that Saddam Hussein will be beseeched by friends, some of them, to quit Kuwait. And of course you have to assume that he's going to have his supporters who will say, fight on. But I can't wait for daybreak because we've got even more work to do, and it's going to be interesting to see whether we can find anybody responsible in this government here in Baghdad to respond not only to the attacks, but also to the address of the President of the United States. Peter?
Yes, indeed, Bernie. Now, President Saddam Hussein has made it clear in the past week that he almost welcomed this war and he was prepared to fight it. So, as we see it continuing, we'll report back to Atlanta, but let me give you John Holliman first.
Now we're going to go back to Atlanta to see what else our other network correspondents have to tell us.
John, Peter, and Bernie, thank you very much. We'll certainly be back with you. It's not quite sunup yet in Baghdad. By the way, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, is reporting that 5 Iraqi Scud missiles have been fired on Saudi Arabia, and the French embassy in Riyadh confirms that at least 1 Scud missile was fired. Those are the first reports of effective or possibly effective retaliatory firing from Iraq outward. Well, we've just heard from the very interior of a bombed country, Iraq. Let's go now to the interior of the United States, the hometown of the late President Harry S. Whoops, we're switching our plans now to go to Charles Jaco in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, we've just been given a statement by General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of the U.S. Central Command and the head of Operation Desert Storm, to the troops. I'll read part of it very briefly. This morning at 0300 Saudi time, we launched Operation Desert Storm, an offensive campaign that will enforce the UN resolutions. And this is directed to the troops, all the troops, especially the U.S. troops. During my visits with you, I have seen in your eyes a fire of determination to get this job done quickly so we all may return to the shores of our great nation. My confidence in you is total. Our cause is just. Now you must be the thunder and lightning of Desert Storm. May God be with you. Signed, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf, Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Central Command. The indications we're getting so far are that the operation to this early date is working fairly well. David?
Well, tonight we know why they call him Stormin' Norman. Thank you for that. We've just been in the heartland of Iraq with our 3 fine correspondents there. Let's go to the heartland of America now, the hometown of the late Harry Truman, where Jeff Flock is standing by.
David, Middle America is tonight glued to the reportage from the Middle East. Let's get first reaction now to the first retaliation, reports of the first retaliation. This gentleman's son is on a Navy destroyer. Sir?
Well, I think he left us with some assurity that they have made decisions based on a lot of good facts, and Congress and him have, we've engaged, and I think the greatest thing I heard is that he's going to allow us to go in there and do battle.
All right. Other reaction. Sir, your first reaction?
I feel like the president's speech was good. This is no Vietnam, and it's not going to be. I back the president and the troops 100%.
Before we get away, a young person, what you saw, what do you think of it?
I don't think it's good, and I don't think we should go to war over just some stupid oil.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
No.
Middle America, Independence, Missouri. We'll be back with more reaction later. I'm Jeff Flock, CNN, reporting live.
Jeff, thank you very much. It's coming up on the time when Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney is going to address the reporters at the Pentagon, fill in a little more of the detail of what is going on and the scope and the size of the forces which have attacked Iraq tonight. We'll also hear from General Colin Powell. Wolf, you're standing by there now. Anything since the last time we talked?
David, here at the Pentagon, there is a packed studio here, obviously anticipating a lot of military details about this operation from Defense Secretary Dick Cheney. He is expected any moment now to walk in here and to provide us these details. The president did provide some initial accounts. Obviously, as we all recall, he was very upbeat, at least in the initial reports from General Norman Schwarzkopf about this operation. He made it clear that this is so far an air campaign, that ground forces have not yet been ordered into Kuwait in order to liberate that country. That has always been anticipated. The initial game plan was always that the United States would try to achieve air superiority as quickly as possible, and only after several days, maybe even a week or two, bring in the Army and the Marines and actually go in, and what Pentagon planners have always hoped would be a mop-up operation. They had always hoped that the Iraqis would surrender after this massive U.S. And Allied airstrike. Only earlier today, military officials in Riyadh, U.S. military officials, said that the United States now has over 1,700 combat aircraft in the theater. Obviously, they had been rehearsing for many weeks and months, getting ready for this operation, pinpointing as many of the strategic targets as possible, trying to destroy them in the initial hour or two. The sense at the Pentagon has always been that this war would be won within an hour or two if the U.S. and the Allied air powers managed to achieve that decisive air superiority. We're also told that about a month ago, when the president met with his military and political advisors at Camp David, he had basically indicated to them to get ready for this operation, that if there was no diplomatic progress, if Saddam Hussein by January 15th was saying that he was not going to leave Kuwait, that the United States, within a day or two, maybe three, would begin the operation, and clearly the President has decided that this is the moment to do it. Again, we're awaiting Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, who is going to be providing us with the initial reports from General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of Operation Desert Sword. David?
All right, thank you very much, Wolf. Let's go back to the White House now and Charles Bierbauer in the aftermath of the President's about 12-minute talk. Charles.
David, President Bush has laid out the objective of freeing Kuwait, but very early on, back in August, he said one other thing that has to be considered is the long-term security arrangement in the Persian Gulf area. Just how he is going to go about that was to go after the nuclear and chemical weapons, and we'll hear more about that from the Pentagon briefing.
And then there'll be both Cheney and General Powell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, will take just a very few questions. As I'm sure you can understand, they're very busy, so they will have time to take just a few questions, and then they will be on their way. So with that, Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you very much, Pete. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you all heard the speech a short time ago by the President. And while there is not a great deal we can add now, we did want to be as forthcoming as we can with you. At 7 o'clock tonight, as you all know by now, Eastern Time, 3 o'clock Thursday morning in the Gulf, the armed forces of the United States began an operation at the direction of the President to force Saddam Hussein to withdraw his troops from Kuwait and to end his occupation of that country. At the direction of the President, I signed the execute order yesterday afternoon to undertake this operation, subject to certain conditions. It was to begin only after we'd met the terms of the resolution passed last Saturday by the Congress. Those conditions have been complied with, and proper notice has been given as required. And the operation was not to take place if there had been any last-minute diplomatic breakthroughs. The operation underway tonight, taking place in the pre-dawn darkness of the Persian Gulf, involves Allied air forces of 4 nations: the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. As they undertake their missions, they do so after months of careful planning. At the direction of the President, great care has been taken to focus on military targets, to minimize U.S. casualties, and to do everything possible to avoid injury to civilians in Iraq and Kuwait. The targets being struck tonight are located throughout Iraq and Kuwait. Our focus is on the destruction of Saddam Hussein's offensive military capabilities, the very capabilities that he used to seize control of Kuwait and that make him a continuing threat to the nations of the Middle East. These are the same capabilities that now threaten American and Allied forces in the Gulf. Our goal, the same one we have maintained throughout Operation Desert Shield, is to liberate Kuwait and enforce the resolutions of the UN Security Council. This portion of the campaign, directed against Saddam Hussein's offensive military force, is an enormously complex undertaking. It involves all of the services of the United States military and hundreds of U.S. and Allied aircraft. It is an ongoing operation, and we must therefore limit the kind and the amount of information that we provide in these early stages. This obviously is different from what happened in Panama in December of 1989, where most of the operation was over by the morning of the first day. We understand your need for information about what will happen next, and we are well aware of our obligation to keep the American people informed. But you must also understand that we cannot talk about future operations without putting at risk the safety of those who will have to carry them out. I believe I can speak for all of us at the Pentagon tonight when I say that we had hoped to settle this matter peacefully. This has clearly been an agonizing decision for the President and the Congress of the United States. And we've reached the point of committing our forces to battle very reluctantly, only after the most careful consideration. But no one should doubt our ability and our resolve to carry out our mission and to achieve our objective. I have great confidence in the professionalism, the dedication, and the determination of the men and women of our armed forces. They are, without question, the finest young sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines this nation has ever sent in harm's way. I want to assure all Americans that we will do our very best to carry out the President's orders as quickly and efficiently as possible and at the lowest cost possible. We'd be happy to respond to a few questions.
Colonel Powell, can you describe the Iraqi Air Force's resistance, if any, their losses so far, and to what extent do you think that you've already achieved air superiority there?
Well, the operation's only 2.5 hours old, so I'm not quite prepared to take on your second question. So far, there has been no air resistance.
Can you tell us if there's been any casualties so far?
We will, at the appropriate time, be releasing information on casualties. We're not prepared to release any specifics now. I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging. The operation appears to have gone very well.
Has there been any Iraqi response of any kind? What can you tell us about the Scud missiles that have been reportedly launched by Iraq?
There have been a number of reports of Scud missiles, but insofar as I am aware, they basically are false reports. General Powell may want to say
Give us a rundown on the types of aircraft and numbers that were involved in the raids.
I really can't at this time because it is an ongoing operation. Let me just say that it involved the Air Forces mentioned by Secretary Cheney and sorties in the hundreds.
Were there cruise missiles involved with that?
I won't comment on specific weaponry. It's an ongoing operation.
What targets were we bombing near Baghdad, and have we bombed any facilities where we think Saddam Hussein might be?
We have not been targeting Mr. Saddam Hussein. The purpose of our bombing facilities in the area of Baghdad is essentially to go after the command and control system of the Iraqi armed forces. And we're looking at principally military targets, command and control installations, air defense sites that could put our planes at risk, but they are militarily oriented targets.
Have you heard any Iraqi response of any kind?
The response of the Iraqi forces at this point has been limited, I think would be the best way to characterize it. But again, let me emphasize, as General Powell did, we are in the very early stages of this operation. It is likely to run for a long period of time. I realize you've all got legitimate questions about it, but there simply are things we do not know yet because it is an ongoing operation, because pilots are just now returning, and there will be a lot of work required to assess the success of the initial efforts, and there will be a lot of follow-up work required as well.
Could you tell us, please, whether or not there have been any indications whatsoever that the Iraqi troops, the 540,000 Iraqi troops in the Kuwaiti theater, have been cut off from their command and control headquarters in Baghdad?
I wouldn't want to speculate on that at this point, Wolf.
What about, Mr. Secretary, can I follow up, please? Should I follow up? The President said this was strictly an air operation for the time being. When does the U.S. decide to send in the ground forces?
It is strictly an air operation for the time being, and I wouldn't want to speculate on the point at which additional forces might be engaged.
Have your targets tonight, there is any Navy planes?
Murat said on the McNeil Lehrer News Hour this evening that we are, quote, now prisoners of our own country, in our own country. Now that we've defended ourselves from naked aggression in the Middle East, how do we defend ourselves here at home from terrorist attacks?
I'm confident that we can deal with the terrorist threat.
Have our targets thus far included tanks and artillery?
I don't want to get into specific target sets yet. As the information comes in and builds over time, and we can give it to you historically, we will give it out, but I'm not prepared to go into specific target sets and what targets have been hit and have not, because it really is just too early to give you that kind of bomb damage assessment.
Saddam Hussein says tomorrow, I give up, I'm sorry, I will withdraw from Kuwait. Will you pause have a pause in your air campaign, or will you continue with it until you knock out all the priority targets?
I will do whatever the President of the United States directs us to do through the Secretary of Defense.
From a military perspective, what went into your thinking in deciding to launch the attack at this point this evening? What were the factors?
Well, I think there were several factors. Of course, the President made the basic decision to commit the force. It was affected by, among other things, the expiration of the United Nations deadline that had been set on November 30th when the Security Council voted for the use of any means necessary to get him out. I think it was affected in part as a result of consultation with our allies, but it also was based upon the advice of our senior military commanders. in terms of picking a time when conditions appeared to be most favorable for undertaking the operation. Let me emphasize, though, that the procedure we went through was to plan for execution of the operation at a point after the expiration of the United Nations deadline, but I had no authority to execute the plan until the President instructed me yesterday afternoon to do so, and it was at that point that we signed out the execute order with the qualifiers I mentioned in my opening statement.
Those favorable factors, can you tell us what some of those were?
I think I just leave it there.
There was no response, or a very small response from the Iraqi forces at this point?
Again, I'm reluctant to characterize the response beyond what we've already said about it. We've not had an opportunity to debrief our pilots yet. Some of them are still flying missions, and I think it would be inappropriate at this point to convey the notion that somehow we've got a final fix on it. But I think it would be fair to say, and General Powell may well want to comment on this, that the initial reaction from the Iraqis is such that I'm generally of the opinion that we achieved a fairly high degree of tactical surprise.
Has there been any Israel or Turkey on the part of Iraq?
None to my knowledge.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us, the President mentioned that one of the objectives was to take out chemical and nuclear sites. Can you tell us in a general way if that mission was accomplished?
I can say that we have, in fact, gone after those targets. I do not yet have information on the effectiveness of those efforts.
Mr. Secretary, what about word of casualties at Baghdad? You indicated you wanted to spare civilians there. Do you have any sense about how that may or may not have occurred in the city? There was a lot of bombing, obviously, in Baghdad.
The best reporting that I've seen on what transpired in Baghdad was on CNN. And, it would appear, based upon the comments that were coming in from the CNN crew in the hotel in Baghdad, that the operation was successful in striking targets with a high degree of precision. At least that's the reporting according to CNN.
Was there an Iraqi attempt to launch missiles, sir?
Do you have any We've had reports of missile launches, but none of them have been confirmed.
What about the Scuds in western Iraq at those air bases on the border? Have you got any reading on that? Are those fairly high priority targets?
Yes, they are fairly high priority targets.
And how'd you do?
I'm not prepared to say how we did or what we've done so far.
I'll follow up on this. At the end of this operation, this phase of the operation, when you get a little better picture, and could you come back or have one of your staff come back and give us a briefing on it?
We'll be getting regular briefings, and we'll be, as the Secretary said, we're going to be as forthcoming as we possibly can, while at the same time preserving operational security.
Are you confident that your targeting of command and control place has left Saddam Hussein the ability to, number one, know what's happening to his forces, and number two, to communicate to you that he wants to quit if he does decide so?
Again, Melissa, I don't have any information at this point on the overall effectiveness of the operation. What I said was the preliminary reports are very positive, but we are in the very earliest stages of this, and therefore there's not a lot of detailed information we can give you on what the effect of the bombing campaign has been on specific strategic categories of targets.
Is there a Navy aircraft participate?
Pardon?
Is there a military commander like Saddam Hussein still alive to surrender if there is such a decision?
I really don't have anything I can give you.
Did you know where Saddam was? Did you know where Saddam was when the attacks began, and was that a target even though he was not the target?
We have not been tracking Mr. Saddam Hussein for the purpose of targeting him.
General, can you characterize in any general way how long the current beginning phase of this operation will continue? That is, the air operation will be the rest of I guess, tonight and tomorrow morning, or throughout tomorrow? Give people any kind of general idea how long this first phase will...
The air part of the campaign will continue until the whole campaign is completed. It doesn't end.
Do you believe the threat of a missile attack by the Iraqis has been eliminated at this point?
I cannot answer that at this time until we get some assessments in.
Any damage to any oil facilities at all? Israel.
I don't have bomb damage assessment yet. I can't answer that question.
General, how massive is this first wave? Are we talking 500 missions, 1,000 missions tonight?
I think tomorrow we'll be in a better position to try to give you a handle on that, but this early in the operation, I'm reluctant to give those numbers out until I've had a chance to talk to General Schwarzkopf in greater detail.
General Powell, when you say hundreds of facilities...
All U.S. services were involved in this part of the campaign.
When you say, General Powell, that there were hundreds of sorties, does that mean that there were not more than 1,000?
I think I'll leave it at that, between a bread box or something else, hundreds of sorties.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Hey, when do we get next update?
The Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, leaving a briefing where they had to leave a lot of questions unanswered on Operation Desert Storm, but the one message they did want to convey was that it's likely to run for a very long period of time. In the words of the Secretary, when asked about air power and when the bombing might stop, he said, "It doesn't end." I would like to thank all my colleagues who sat in with me for this segment of the broadcast on a very historic night, and end my portion here in Washington with thanks to them and thanks to you. As we go now to Atlanta and Lou Waters and Catherine Cryer. I'm David French in Washington.
Thank you, David. We've certainly been following your reporting throughout the evening. Now, I'd like to, at this point, go over some of the things that Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney had to say. We've been listening to his remarks. He apparently received authorization from President Bush yesterday afternoon to sign the order authorizing military action against Iraq. That military action began some 19 hours after the passage of the UN resolution deadline date. Secretary Cheney clarified the goals of this military operation. A surgical airstrike, as expected and anticipated, would be against military targets, specifically command and control targets, those targets that could damage incoming U.S. and international coalition aircraft, apparently which included British and Saudi Arabian aircraft in that initial bombing run into Baghdad and throughout Iraq and Kuwait. Also to protect Iraqi citizens and minimize civilian casualties as the airstrikes attempted to destroy Iraq's offensive military capabilities throughout Iraq and Kuwait. He stressed that the operation thus far was deemed very successful. Of course, information from the Secretary and General Powell is necessarily limited according to the ongoing nature of this military operation, but we have correspondents standing by across the United States and throughout the Gulf region to continue our updates on events as they unfold. Luke?
We did learn that 4 nations were involved in the air operation tonight, the USA and the UK, as Catherine reported. Also Saudi Arabia and 150 planes of the Kuwaiti Air Force were involved. We have been taking a slight check here of strategic targets in Iraq, many of which are in the Baghdad area, which we have been reporting on throughout the early evening. We note that there are at least 2 nuclear facilities, 2 biological, 3 missile-producing facilities, and 5 chemical facilities. This comes from a list of strategic targets that's available to us, I would imagine, in addition to the command and control targets in the Baghdad area. There may be many more sites that were hit tonight, but we must stress the fact that we're only getting a small part of the information because this was an operation in all of Kuwait and all of Iraq. Now, Wolf Blitzer, who was at that Pentagon news briefing, is joining us from the Pentagon. Many questions went begging. Wolf.
Well, Lou, the Defense Secretary and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs clearly want to avoid providing too much operational detail, anything that could yet help the Iraqis in this initial air wave, this initial air assault. But clearly, by the tone of what they said, earlier hinted by the President, the United States is obviously very pleased by the initial reports coming from the Central Command in Riyadh. The U.S. targets appear to have been met, clearly the most important ones being the Scud missile batteries. In fact, Defense Secretary Cheney said that while there have been reports that the Iraqis have managed to fire some of their Scuds, the United States cannot confirm those reports. Indeed, the initial indications are that the U.S. fighter aircraft, the bombers, probably destroyed almost all of those strategic targets in Iraq within a matter of minutes, certainly within the first hour or two of what was certainly a very coordinated polished U.S. airstrike, one that the United States has been rehearsing now for many months. The indications also are, of course, from these initial reports, that those Scud missile bases in the western part of Iraq, what the U.S. calls H2 and H3, almost certainly have been destroyed. Those were the ones that endangered Israel. Those were the ones that could have reached Israel, and Saddam Hussein and his aides had repeatedly suggested over these past several weeks that their first target, if there was a war, would be to go after Israel. And from the initial reports, based on what we just heard, there were no missile attacks at the Israelis. Certainly, the U.S. planners here at the Pentagon are pleased. We're not going to be getting a whole lot more detail, we're told, until another briefing tomorrow. But certainly there are enough officials here who are getting indications about what exactly is going on. We'll be following that, of course. We'll be trying to report as much as we can in the course of this long and historic evening. Lou?
All right, Wolf Blitzer, who remains at his post at the Pentagon, will be back to you. Catherine.
Now let's return to the Al Rashid Hotel in Baghdad and CNN's Bernie Shaw. Bernie?
This is CNN Baghdad, checking for continuity with Atlanta.
We hear you, Bernie.
You're on the air, Bernie.
We are still crouching on the floor here in Baghdad in our bureau. It is very quiet right now. It's almost 6 o'clock in the morning. It is still relatively dark, John Holliman, and it sounds to me that one or two vehicles of some kind are going past the hotel.
Yes, I looked out the window just a moment ago, Bernie. I saw a taxi cab out on the street. That's talk about somebody with enterprise. That driver, if he's trying to pick up a fare, is certainly enterprising. You don't see any signs of people, but it is, of course, still dark. And this time yesterday morning, there was a thick early morning fog over the city of Baghdad. This morning, the fog is not that visible. And what is still visible out there is some smoke out on the horizon from some of these bombs that came through here several hours ago now.
And we should tell our viewers that we are anxiously awaiting daybreak so we can regroup and see where we go from here. As President Bush addressed the nation and the world, he indicated at the beginning of his remarks that the operations were underway as he spoke. And indeed, a few minutes into his address, off the horizon, we could see and hear the effects of another bombing run.
I guess, Bernie, all in all, there might have been 7 or 8 different waves of these. The first one came about 3 o'clock in the morning our time. I had just gotten under the covers and was planning to sleep for a few hours before coming in at 6 in the morning about this time to relieve you from the overnight shift. And obviously we were both rudely awakened by what happened outside our windows.
Well, and to continue on this thought, John, at the time of the attack, if you're wondering how we were able to get the word to you, and right now, let me apologize to anybody in Atlanta or the engineers or what have you, and to our viewers. Clearly, when I looked up and saw what was going on, the first instinct was to report the information, to get it on the air. CNN President Tom Johnson was arranging an interview on the telephone, and I apologize for screaming at anybody at headquarters in Atlanta, but I wanted to get your attention. And then the network came up to us, came to Baghdad, and we sought to describe what we were seeing, hearing, and feeling. And then I rushed down to the bomb shelter to make certain that I knew where it was. And when I was worried down there, wondering, does the world know what's going on? And I'm told that indeed the world did know what was going on because they could hear the reports. We're composed and organized now as much as you can be when a city is under attack or certain targets are under attack. And right now, there's this eerie stillness in Baghdad. John?
So, Bernie, we should let our viewers know that we're in the dark pretty much. The hotel has no electricity. The way we were able to speak to you is we have some battery-powered equipment. Luckily, it'll work if you plug it into the wall or plug it into a battery. And it's now plugged into batteries, which we're able to scramble and find in the dark. And we think our batteries will last a while longer, so we'll be able to continue this report. And it's possible, I suppose, that by sunup, the officials in Baghdad might turn the lights back on, so we might be able to recharge our batteries and go out on the streets and do the job that we came here to do, which is show you the pictures of this place.
We do not know where President Saddam Hussein is, nor do we know the whereabouts of his key advisors. We are hoping sometime later today to hear from the government, to hear what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what their reaction is to the series of bombing raids on strategic targets during the night. Let me pause for a moment to see whether our colleagues want to go elsewhere with our continuing coverage of what's happening in the Gulf.
We'll be back with you. At this point, let's go to Lou now. Lou?
And I'm going to check it right over to the White House where Charles Bierbauer is standing by.
President Bush has told us repeatedly that he did not think Saddam Hussein was getting the message about what was arrayed against him. The president tried to send a letter to Saddam Hussein. He sent his Secretary of State, James Baker, to Geneva with that letter. This is the one that the Iraqi Foreign Minister, Tariq Aziz, refused to accept. The letter basically said to Saddam Hussein, if you do not withdraw, I am going to level your military capacity. I am going to attack your military ability to wage virtually any kind of war. That's a paraphrase, but beyond that paraphrase, George Bush has now sent a much more distinct message to Saddam Hussein. And we got the first inkling of just how massive this was in the president's speech when he said that he's taking out the tanks, but he also said he's going at the chemical facilities, the nuclear facilities. He is dealing with not only Saddam Hussein's ability to occupy Kuwait, but also his ability to wage further war at any point in the future. This is what George Bush was talking about when he said not only is the objective to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, but to guarantee some sort of regional stability arrangement that gets beyond this situation. There was considerable concern about Saddam Hussein being at some point, maybe it's months, maybe it's years from having a nuclear capacity. But what Mr. Bush has done tonight in describing this kind of a military attack on Iraq is to also describe what he is trying to do in terms of rendering Saddam Hussein incapable of waging war for quite some time to come. And the second message in this attack is the message, at least in the president's words, was his message to the Iraqi people. He said to the Iraqi people, perhaps you can convince Saddam Hussein to end this now. Lou?
Yes, Charles, I was wondering about that. What kind of a signal is he sending to Iraq by making a statement like that?
Well, it will have to get there somewhat indirectly, but he has done this before. He has said that he hoped that the Iraqi people would have some ability to convey to Saddam Hussein that they didn't want a war. You could, I suppose, in the extreme, say that he's fomenting an insurrection against them. There had been certainly tacit hopes here at the White House among the Bush administration that someone would oust Saddam Hussein, but the signals that were given out verbally were ineffective, and perhaps no one is of that sufficient strength. Now he would hope that the people of Iraq might in some way, shape, or form say to Saddam Hussein, enough is enough. This is as strong a message as George Bush can probably send.
All right, Charles Bierbauer at the White House. Catherine.
Of course, people across the United States are watching and waiting. Let's go now to John Zarella, who's standing by at Shaw Air Force Base. John?
Catherine, we are just down the street, actually, from Shaw Air Force Base. Not too far away, right, Lee? And I'm with Lee Esmonde, and her daughter Shannon, and Kitty here sleeping. And Lee's husband, Bill, is in Saudi Arabia, and he's been over there since August. He's an air traffic controller, so there's a possibility that tonight he may very well have been directing some of the attacks that were going on against Saddam Hussein. And we've been talking while sitting here watching the president since about 8:30 tonight. And Lee, what did you think first of what the president said, and then, of course, what Secretary Cheney said about what's been going on?
Well, I was very impressed with the president speaking, and I believe that everything is systems go, if you will. Things are running smoothly, on schedule. We are achieving our goals as we had set out to do as a result of the failure of diplomatic solutions to come about.
You think then, from talking to you earlier, that the president has taken the right course of action?
Absolutely. I think this has been going on long enough. We have had, the coalition has been doing their best to achieve some sort of a solution to this situation, and nobody seems to have been effective when it comes to Saddam Hussein.
You seem so strong through all of this. How do you manage?
Well, bless your heart. I guess since Bill's been away for several months, it's sort of seasoning. But with what's going on now, I am very, I hate to say this, but I'm glad that this has occurred. Not only the sooner it gets started, possibly the sooner Saddam will realize that we mean business, and rather than annihilate his country, we can come to a solution prior to going to that last step.
What are your feelings tonight as far as, I mean, you haven't gotten much sleep, though, in the last couple of days, and as far as your husband and where he is and what the troops and all the people are going through right now?
Well, from what I get from Bill, the morale is high, although the waiting can get too great on the nerves. And I spoke with some wives today, and they said that the people that are over there that used to be best of friends are now starting to squabble with one another, even under the best of conditions. I guess living in close quarters like that, that can occur.
What do you tell Shannon about all this, about what her daddy's doing over there and the job that he's performing, the service for his country? How do you put it to her?
Well, I try to be as honest and as upfront as I can. Sometimes you just have to say the truth regardless of the outcome. When it comes to kids, you can only shield them so much. She knows that her daddy runs the risk of not coming back home, but she also knows that what he is doing is vital and it is necessary, and that is what he has trained 15 years to do. And we're patriotic in this family, and we believe that what is going on now is unnecessary.
Lee, thank you very much for letting us invade your privacy at what is probably a very private moment for you and your family.
Actually, I'm proud that I could voice my opinion.
Thank you, Lee, again. We will stay with you throughout the night. This is John Zarello reporting live near Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina.
One of the countries in the Middle East dramatically caught in this crisis, of course, is Jordan, caught literally between Iraq and Israel. We're waiting for a reaction from there. Now on the line from Amman, Jordan, CNN's Margaret Lowry. Margaret.
Well, there have been some reports earlier tonight. We understand that the U.S. Embassy in Amman, Jordan was being evacuated. We have been on the phone with a spokesman for the U.S. Embassy who flatly denies this. He says there are no evacuation plans for the embassy at this time. In fact, the State Department ordered out non-essential diplomats and dependents of U.S. government workers about 2 weeks ago. And the feeling here is that pretty much everyone who was going to leave is gone. They have reduced the staff at the embassy considerably, but they won't give any figures.
Any special civil defense precautions being taken there, Margaret?
Well, the Jordanians have been in a pretty low-key state of readiness. There have been various films on television to show people what to do should there be trouble here. But Jordan has repeatedly stressed that it is not a combatant in this conflict, that it is in between Iraq and Israel, but it is not a party to this, and it hopes that it will be able to stay neutral.
Do you have a feeling of being safe in Amman, Jordan tonight? Morning for you.
As of this hour, the city is pretty much still asleep, and the word is not really out about what has happened in Baghdad. So I think at the moment, we all feel everything is pretty calm here. Who knows what daylight will bring.
All right. Margaret Lowry in Amman, Jordan, where it's about 6 a.m. Catherine.
And, of course, bordering Jordan and specifically threatened by Saddam Hussein, the nation of Israel. Let's go now to Richard Blystone standing by in Jerusalem. Richard?
Catherine, an Israeli army spokesman has been on television just recently to tell a little bit about U.S. bombing raids against missile sites in western Iraq aimed at Israel. He said, we know of hits, and the danger, he said, to Israel is diminishing. Those were his words. He said he refused to give more details, but it was more than we got out of the Pentagon. This spokesman said, we hope he got a lot of them. Iraq was believed to have perhaps a couple of dozen missiles in position to fire at Israel. It has something like 60-odd launchers and a couple of hundred missiles around the country, but not all of those were able to hit Israel, and it is thought that he would have been able to get only a few through in any case. But if the quiet here is any indication, the Army spokesman's wishes came true. CNN correspondent Richard Roth in Tel Aviv, which was Saddam Hussein's promised main target in Israel if it came to hostilities. He reports that it's all quiet there, and certainly it is as quiet here as could be expected. This is a great relief to Israel and to the United States in more ways than one, militarily and politically, because if Israel had been drawn into the war, it would have endangered the participation of the Arab members of the coalition. Israel promised the United States it would not strike first, would not mount a preventive strike against the missiles in western Iraq, which are about 300 miles from Jerusalem here. And the Israelis said yesterday they had had no promise of early warning from the United States, although they do have some reconnaissance and intelligence capability of their own in this regard, they said. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir said that he had, according to a spokesman, had about an hour's warning of the raids which were undertaken in what was the early morning hours here. The health minister was in CNN's office here recently and said, despite the apparent success of the campaign so far, he is still carrying his gas mask and will until he knows that Saddam Hussein is finished. I haven't opened my gas mask yet, and I just hope that I won't have to. Catherine?
Thank you, Richard Blystone in Jerusalem. Luke?
We are now going to switch to Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, where many of the planes launched in these early raids of the operation were from. Charles Jaco is there. Charles, what have you got for us?
Well, it's very quiet here right now, but I'm here with Khalid Al-Maina, who is the editor of the Arab News, the largest publication in Saudi Arabia. Sir, thank you very much for taking some time to spend with us. Your reaction very briefly to the attack on Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
I think it was a sense of relief for all of us because the tension, the waiting period was over. Saddam had all the chances, he didn't use them, so I think people felt it's time for him to go.
Now, a lot of people have speculated this military campaign could last 6 months or 6 days. You've observed Saddam Hussein for years, know his capabilities. What do you think?
I think if there will be strategic strikes at all his bases and installations, it could take about 2 weeks. I also think the army could fold up and they could surrender en masse.
Well, now that's an interesting question because a lot of analysts have said that Saddam's army is paralyzed by fear. They know what will happen to them if they surrender, and a lot of people are discounting the fact they might surrender. Why do you think they might give up?
Well, they'll give up because they are in close proximity to the Allied forces and they're far away from Saddam, so I think they will defect in thousands.
Now, so far, Saddam has tried no strikes against Saudi Arabia. Are you and other people here worried about possible terrorist actions?
Well, everybody in the Gulf is worried about any possible terrorist action, but I think people are ready. The government has issued a directive a couple of days ago warning any would-be terrorists or would-be defaulted of security that they will be suffering severe penalty.
And one final question. You've observed Saddam, as I said, for years. If the campaign goes badly for him, do you think there's any chance he might surrender? The man is a man of many surprises. What do you think the scenarios might be?
Well, I don't think he's going to commit suicide in his bunker, but I think he could try his best to escape because Saddam basically is a coward at heart.
So you think there would be no chance of him surrendering to the Allied forces?
No way, because he doesn't want to be tied up in chains and taken to court, and I mean his ego wouldn't permit him to do so.
Thank you very much. One view from here in Saudi Arabia in the very, very early hours of this campaign, which started approximately 6 hours ago here in Saudi Arabia. So far, the early reports militarily we're receiving is that at least the first flight of planes returned, U.S. and Saudi planes, without any casualties. That is from one Saudi official. We'll have to wait and see if that shows out to be true. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia.
Thanks, Charles. Well, it's just 8 minutes after 6 in the morning in Iraq. Dawn has not yet arrived. For 3 hours, U.S.-led forces in the Gulf have been bombarding Iraqi strategic targets in a massive and coordinated airstrike. After a tense 5-month standoff, war has come to the Gulf. 1 hour ago, President Bush addressed the nation and the world to explain what is happening and why.
Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free. Iraq will eventually comply with all relevant United Nations resolutions, and then, when peace is restored, it is our hope that Iraq will live as a peaceful and cooperative member of the family of nations, thus enhancing the security and stability of the Gulf. Some may ask, why act now? Why not wait? The answer is clear. The world could wait no longer. Sanctions, though having some effect, showed no signs of accomplishing their objective. Sanctions were tried for well over 5 months, and we and our allies concluded that sanctions alone would not force Saddam from Kuwait. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein systematically raped, pillaged, and plundered a tiny nation, no threat to his own. He subjected the people of Kuwait to unspeakable atrocities. And among those maimed and murdered, innocent children. While the world waited, Saddam sought to add to the chemical weapons arsenal he now possesses an infinitely more dangerous weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear weapon. And while the world waited, while the world talked peace and withdrawal, Saddam Hussein dug in and moved massive forces into Kuwait. While the world waited, while Saddam stalled, more damage was being done to the fragile economies of the Third World, the emerging democracies of Eastern Europe, to the entire world, including to our own economy. The United States, together with the United Nations, exhausted every means at our disposal to bring this crisis to a peaceful end. However, Saddam clearly felt that by stalling and threatening and defying the United Nations, he could weaken the forces arrayed against him.
President Bush says his objective is not the conquest of Iraq, but the liberation of Kuwait. He adds he hopes to bring home the U.S. troops in the Gulf region as soon as possible. The United States calls it Operation Desert Storm. CNN's Charles Crawford reports on what has happened since the anti-Iraqi alliance pulled the trigger less than 4 hours ago.
This is, something is happening outside.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun.
Reports say the long-awaited airstrikes hit Iraq with mammoth force. The first targets, as many as possible of Iraq's command and control centers, the eyes and ears of the Iraqi armed forces. Also, missile bases, anti-aircraft weapons, airports throughout Iraq. The weapons believed to be F-15 fighters, also F-4 fighters, and FB-111 fighter bombers. Allied officials confirm Saudi and British warplanes took part also. The apparent goal of the first wave of Allied air attacks, to clear a safe path for continued raids on Iraq and cut off Saddam Hussein from his estimated 545,000 troops in the Kuwaiti theater of operations. Then, reports from U.S. officials in the Persian Gulf, a safe return of the first wave of U.S. warplanes. General Norman Schwarzkopf, commander of the U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia, issued this statement. You are a member of the most powerful force of our country in coalition with our allies that has ever been assembled in a single theater to face such an aggressor. Now you have trained hard for this battle, and you are ready. Our cause is just. Now, you must be the thunder and lightning of Desert Storm. May God be with you, your loved ones at home, and our country. In the United States, as in the Persian Gulf, what was the far-off war has become a reality.
No, I didn't think it would come tonight, and I didn't think it would hit quite so hard. I knew that there were airplanes launched. I don't know if he's one of them. I'm scared. I can't think of a better place to have been tonight than to have been in church.
Charles Crawford, CNN, reporting.
At the United Nations tonight, the Secretary General said he felt deep sorrow that the diplomatic efforts to avert this war had failed. Jeannie Mose is at the UN where there was supposed to have been, or there was a possibility of some action tonight. Jeannie?
There will be action tonight. Before I get into that, Lou, I just wanted to mention that a U.S. official has told CNN that this massive bombing might go on for 7 to 10 days everywhere, he said, in Iraq and Kuwait, 7 to 10 days. Right now, at the UN, the president of the Security Council is holding what we call bilateral consultations with members. That means one-on-one meetings with different members of the council. It's possible there'll be a closed-door meeting of all 15 members of the council later tonight. though the U.S. mission is telling us not to expect the U.S. ambassador to be briefing the members of the Council in any detail because it is simply too early in the hostilities for that to happen. Now, we know that President Bush did call the Secretary General of the UN before the fighting broke out, and a U.S. official tells us that basically the Secretary General was told that diplomacy has ended, that it's time for Resolution 678 to be implemented. 678 is the resolution authorizing the use of force. The Secretary General, of course, the President did not go into great detail on exactly what the United States was doing. As you mentioned, Lou, the Secretary General tonight, his initial reaction was he expressed deep sorrow. He said he was saddened by the start of hostilities. A U.S. official told us about the notion that the Secretary General should be saddened. That U.S. official says, well, what did he expect? Now, until hostilities get further along, U.S. officials have indicated to us that there's nothing much that the Security Council can do. There will be an important role for the Council once the time comes to make peace, but for the moment, there's not a lot that can be done by the Council. And if any nation tries to bring up any kind of resolution that would limit what the U.S. is trying to do, the U.S. official indicated that it would be vetoed by the United States. Now, as for Iraqi reaction, well, one of our correspondents went to the Iraqi mission to the United Nations earlier tonight and tried to talk to the Iraqis. The window was closed in his face, and they said no, no, no. So at this point, no reaction yet from the Iraqis, and the Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations, we have not seen him yet. The Kuwaiti ambassador, though, is talking. He welcomed the attack, and he says he wished victory to the U.S.-led operation. I'm Jeannie Mose, reporting live from the United Nations.
Jeannie, I'm curious about the phrase diplomacy has ended. We know war is a political act. There may be a pause in the diplomacy, but can't we expect it to continue? Or do we have to wait for peace before diplomacy resumes?
I think everything depends on how Saddam Hussein reacts. I mean, if Saddam Hussein is willing to make some kind of gesture now and is willing to kind of give up, well, then I think there is room for diplomacy. But this official was basically saying that the Security Council authorized this action, and now there is nothing that the Security Council can really do until things get further along.
Are there channels open for Iraq to reach us?
I think there are lots of channels open. I think Iraq had the chance to reach the United States if it wanted to. It became clear. I mean, there were so many initiatives going around here at the UN even, and none of those. Iraq did not take advantage of any of those initiatives.
All right. Jeannie Mose at the United Nations, where she'll continue to keep watch on that part of the story. Catherine.
U.S. military leaders in Washington, of course, operating predominantly out of the Pentagon and standing by their live Wolf Blitzer. Wolf, will this air campaign continue?
Yes, Catherine, we're told here that this is going to be a sustained, massive air campaign as promised by Pentagon planners over all of these weeks leading up to today. We've also been told, CNN has now confirmed from U.S. and Israeli officials that what was considered a major Iraqi threat to Israel now appears to have passed. There is a growing sense here at the Pentagon as well as elsewhere in Washington that the Iraqi Scud missile bases in the western part of Iraq, what the U.S. intelligence community has dubbed H-2 and H-3, those missile batteries have been destroyed by the U.S. fighter aircraft that went into Iraq in the initial assault. We have also been told that the United States informed Israel 1 hour before Operation Desert Storm began that this was going to take place, that Israel should not participate. The United States has always asked Israel to take a low-key profile in order not to antagonize some of the Arab coalition partners. The Israelis, of course, have agreed. They have not gotten involved, and there is a growing sense of relief in Israel. We're told here in Washington, at the Pentagon and elsewhere, that the Iraqi threats, as often stated as they were, do not appear to have come to a realization, at least at this early point. Catherine?
Wolf, have there been any reports at all of any sort of Iraqi retaliation?
All of the indications are that this was what one Pentagon official described to me just a little while ago as a blowout. Probably the most massive, the most concentrated U.S. airstrike, or perhaps any airstrike in history. Certainly the most highly coordinated, using some of the most sophisticated high-tech weaponry, that there was very little, if any, Iraqi resistance. The Iraqis appear to have been caught by surprise on the ground, as Defense Secretary Cheney and General Colin Powell said a little while ago, there was tactical surprise. The Iraqis had always boasted that they would be able to deal with this U.S. threat. American officials, in countering that boast, always said the Iraqis would have no idea what was going on. General Powell only a week ago said in a speech here in Washington that the Iraqis should know they're not dealing with 15-year-old Iranians who were cannon fodder. And that clearly appears to have been the case, given the optimism coming here from Pentagon officials as we go into the evening.
Thank you, Wolf Blitzer at the Pentagon. Lou?
Operation Desert Storm began about 3 hours and 20 minutes ago. It's nearly daylight now in Baghdad, where some of our most dramatic reporting came tonight. Reports of brilliant flashes of light, thunderous explosions, heavy anti-aircraft fire, and air raid sirens. That's where three of our correspondents are, John Holliman, Peter Arnett, and now Bernie Shaw. Bernie? Bernie Shaw, can you hear us? Atlanta calling, Baghdad.
Hello.
You're on
Hello, Lou. I'm here now. I was
under the
pressing the wrong piece of the equipment. The deep glow of night becoming dawn is unfolding over the skies of Baghdad, and it is quiet. An occasional vehicle is going by, and we heard the first siren of a fire engine going somewhere. We cannot see. Well, I'm hearing some more reports now of an anti-aircraft battery or perhaps an explosion. But right now it is eerily quiet here in Baghdad. We have the pleasure of being able to sit in a chair for a change. For the last few hours, we have been on our stomachs and on our knees and on our hands, moving about as we sought to observe and to report to you. We're well. All of us are, of course, exhausted. Our energy levels are way off the register, and that's the way it feels right now. Let me be quiet to listen for a question from you, and also tell you that Peter Arnett and John Holliman are here, and each will have something to say very shortly.
Yes, Bernie, it's near daylight now. Are you able to see any of the damage caused by what the Pentagon is telling us were strategic and pinpoint bombings?
Well, I can certainly vouch for that, and Peter Arnett will be able to stitch together some images in just a second. How does it feel to be at ground zero when a massive aerial campaign, unprecedented in military history, is unfolding around you? The only thing I can think of is that it's comparable to being at Cape Kennedy and feeling the ground rumble, the thunder, and seeing that huge shuttle with its booster rockets taking off and hearing the thunder. Only in this instance, in reality, here in Baghdad, you heard it sporadically. Bright lights. It was quite an experience to feel it, to see it, to think about what it means and why it was happening, and of course to report it. I'm going to yield here now to Peter Arnett and John Holliman.
Yes, Peter.
Hello, Lou. Peter Arnett here.
Hi.
Just a small observation. It has to be pretty unique in journalistic history to have a front row seat to one of the great air bombardments of history. I'd just like to point out that these are just the first shots in this war, and there are no indications yet, we may have them later in the day, how Saddam Hussein feels about it, but he has a 1 million-man strong army. He said he will fight on with the cry, Allahu Akbar, God is great. And these are the first shots, and from this vantage point in Baghdad, we'll be interested to see how these events unfold from here. I'd like to hand you to John Holliman now.
Lou, what I'm going to do for you is look out the window and tell you what I see. It's something I do pretty well. I'll tell you, about 3 hours ago, the sky was brightly lighted with the tracer rounds from the anti-aircraft guns. Right now, the early morning fog that has inhabited Baghdad each early morning for the past several days is beginning to roll back in. But out on the 8-lane highway, which runs in front of our hotel, there are signs of early morning traffic. We've reported to you for many months that the society in Iraq is very well organized, and despite the fact that there was a major air attack here just a few hours ago, the morning commuter buses that are supposed to take off and drive down to the downtown bus station at this hour are on the road, and they're driving out to the bus station. As Bernie reported, we saw a hook and ladder fire truck go by, I guess about 10 or 15 minutes ago. We've also heard some small arms fire out the window in the past few minutes, but no sign of the conflagration in the skies that we reported to you on a few hours back. Downtown Baghdad really looks pretty calm right now, and the events of 3 hours ago seem to fade into memory. Bernie?
Thanks, John. We have a brother of the profession here, Don Kirk of USA Today, and this is our first eyewitness account from somebody who was outside where we've been reporting from. Don, how did you manage to make it back from the American Embassy to here?
I just drove back in the same taxi that took me to the embassy. He hadn't gotten his fare yet, so he wanted to get a full fare, so he took me back through darkened streets. There was tracer fire all over the sky on both sides of the river, but the streets were dark and calm and somewhat eerie, and there was no sign of bombing or bomb damage in the center of the city through which I drove, which doesn't mean to say that something didn't fall while I was still at the embassy. The reason I was at the American Embassy, incidentally, was that I had an open phone line to USA Today when the anti-aircraft fire began going off. I called them once more, and the line went down moments later, leaving me with no way to communicate. I came back here, and the first thing that happened to me was that they put me in the bomb shelter along with a whole lot of other journalists who were stuck down there. I managed to sort of exfiltrate my way out and up to where I am now through a back stairs.
As you were driving back in your taxi, Don Kirk of USA Today, what were you able to see on the streets in terms of people?
There were no people on the streets. There were some cars on the streets. My driver wanted to drive with his lights out, running the risk of a rather serious accident. I persuaded him to put his dim lights on from time to time. We passed some other cars, some with dim lights on, some totally dark. There were no people on the streets, and incidentally, there were no signs of military on the streets. I did see some police cars go roaring by, and a couple of taxis madly dashing through the night, but that was about it. Don, any signs of damage from this attack anywhere between here and the U.S. Embassy? I didn't see a single sign of damage, and I might add that I went a route that took me by the presidential palace. Now, for all I know, the palace was not even there when I went by it, but the place was totally dark and silent as I went by. From the embassy, there was AAA anti-aircraft artillery going off around the embassy and around the palace very heavily with tracer bullets of differing colors all over the place. I heard a couple of thunderous explosions, which I guess you guys heard too, which was...
We not only heard them, we felt them. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney has confirmed that they were going after strategic targets and such things as command control centers, anti-aircraft batteries. The intention, according to the Pentagon, was to blind Saddam Hussein and to cut him off from being able to communicate with his troops to the south of here.
Well, certainly there's no communication. There's no local telephone at this point. You can't even call another room where we are, and there's no communication overseas. Telexes are out, phones are out, and this means here is about the only one that I know, which is one reason why I happen to join you here.
Well, it's good to have you, brother. We're glad you're safe, and if the people at USA Today are listening, he looks quite safe to me, just a little bit winded. You have to go 14 stories high to get up here to the CNN broadcast position. Let me pause for a moment just in case our colleagues along the way have something to ask us or if they want to go somewhere else.
No, nothing here, Bernie. We're fascinated by what you have to say there.
Okay, we will... is that switch correct, John? I think we will continue here as a very satisfied Don Kirk makes his way out of our place. John, we're going to be able to see a little bit better here now very, very shortly. That's encouraging.
That's right, Bernie. Don Kirk, as he just pointed out, didn't see any signs of damage. And if what Secretary Cheney wanted the Pentagon to do was what it did and do surgical bombing, then perhaps we won't see much damage to the infrastructure here in downtown Baghdad. We can begin to see out to the horizon now, and you can see more and more cars with their lights on as we go along here.
I just have a reaction, a comment to make to what you were saying about Defense Secretary Cheney and surgical bombing. Very simply put, if this was surgical bombing, I don't like being this close to the operating table.
Bernie, good thought. I'll tell you, I can just describe what I see on the streets to you. Again, there's a large truck, not an 18-wheeler, but it looks like the kind of truck you'd rent in the United States to move some things from one place to another. It's going down the street. There's some some sort of fire of some kind that we just heard out the window. It sounded like large caliber weapons fire, but we don't see any sign of it because out here the fog gets thicker and thicker. Bernie?
One observation. When we first came up on the air and we were reporting the first seconds of the attack, the first raid coming in, we heard a lot of small arms fire around the streets. And as we have been reporting throughout the night, as the F-15s, 16s came in, you don't see them, you hear them. You hear them after they are gone. And imagine, if you will, a plane swooping in low, going toward its target, and then passing you by, going so fast, and then seeing tracers from the anti-aircraft batteries. There was no match, but apparently the civilian militias and these young boys, 15 and older, who were issued these Soviet machine guns and hand weapons, they were just firing into the air as they realized the battle was on.
Yeah, there were some reports, Bernie, you'll remember a couple of months ago, that said one of the Iraqi defensive strategies was to have everybody with a weapon pointed straight up if there were an air attack, and that might have been what we were seeing, or at least hearing some evidence of a few hours ago. It feels better here. It feels a little more comfortable, a lot more comfortable, in fact, than it did when we were lying on the floor and feeling these blasts.
I think I've been awake for what, about 30 hours? How long have you been awake?
At least that long, a long time, Bernie, and the adrenaline's beginning to go down. You know, that rush after rush after rush is kind of working its way out of our bodies, I think. Both of us look almost like zombies, but...
Well, we feel like zombies, let's just hope that our minds will continue to serve us, and our senses and our abilities to continue reporting to the world what it is we are experiencing and seeing here. I just hope, I've said it once before, I just hope that as morning unfolds, we'll be able to find and talk with and listen to some responsible officials from Saddam Hussein's government. Right now, everybody continues to hunker down. Let me turn the switch off to see whether Lou has something for us.
All right, I will do that, Bernie. And I'll tell you one more thing, Lou, before we do that. We made a great deal of videotape. I mean, there's going to be some fascinating pictures which we took out the windows of our hotel. The Iraqi officials came up after the attack, confiscated them. We hope they will give them back. They said they'd give them back to us after daylight, and we'll just see if we can show those to you later in the day. Lou?
All right, gentlemen, you're sounding tired. Take a little rest. We'll be back to you soon. That's Bernard Shaw, John Holliman, and Peter Arnett in Baghdad, reporting live to us. Catherine.
Countless U.S. families are watching these events unfold, are on alert just as their loved ones are serving in the Gulf. Let's go now to one such town, the site of a naval air base, and CNN's Tom Mintier in Norfolk, Virginia. Tom?
I am between Norfolk and Virginia Beach, actually a little closer to the Virginia Beach side. You know, Peter and Bernie and John were talking about the world watching. Well, the world is behind me right now. This is a restaurant here in Virginia Beach, and a lot of people have been glued to the television set throughout the evening, watching what has been going on in Baghdad, watching what has been going on to the Pentagon. It is something that everybody around here pretty much knew was going to happen. They just didn't know when. Let's talk to some of the people here now. You, I understand, you're in the Coast Guard. What do you think about what President Bush has done?
I agree with him 100%. Back him 100%. He's right.
Did you think this was going to come tonight?
Yes. Not tonight, but I knew it was going to happen.
Okay, there's another fella down a little bit farther down that is also a Coast Guard member. A lot of military frequent these restaurants, and they're in here most of the time. You are also in the Coast Guard. Yes. Are you concerned about what's been going on?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about what's been going on lately. It's kind of scary, actually. I think that, you know, I could easily be over there, and it's dangerous. It really is.
Do you think the president should have done something different? Waited?
I don't think he could have done anything else, but he gave Saddam every chance. He laid down the ultimatum, and he just didn't follow it.
Okay, there are a lot of worried relatives. We have talked to several people in here who you find in this town, they know someone who is in the Navy or they are related to someone. Your brother is on a support ship with Wisconsin, right?
Yes, that's correct. Very worried as well. You know, you sit there and you wait and been waiting all this time, and finally it's happened. I'm glad it's happened, though. I mean, because now we can get it over and everybody can come back and get back to the life on a normal basis.
What makes you think that this is going to be a short duration military action?
Because unlike Vietnam, we're going in with all our forces this time. As the president said, we don't have one hand tied behind our back this time. They're going for it, going all out, and I think it'll be well worth it.
When the bombing was going on, were you watching it on television?
No, actually, I was at work at the time when I got into the car and heard that the bombing had gone on. And, was glad to hear that because, I've been over there since August 2nd, and I think it's time for something to be initiated.
Okay, so there's a lot of people that have a lot of opinions about what has happened all over this area. There are military families that are at home. They're getting support either from their churches or from the Navy. They have a support center set up as soon as the bombing started. While it was still going on, as a matter of fact, we were in a church, and they were already making calls to their congregation to make sure they had people to go to the home of the military family to make sure they were not alone during these times. I'm Tom Mintier, CNN, reporting live from Virginia Beach.
Day is beginning to break in the Middle East. CNN's Doug James is at his post in Amman, Jordan, and joins us now live with his report. Doug.
As you say, it will soon be daybreak here in Jordan. We've already heard the first calls to prayer at the mosques. Clearly, the previous prayers for peace have not been answered. With me now is Senator Mohammed Kamal, the former Jordanian ambassador to Washington. I wonder, sir, what your reaction is to the events of this evening.
Well, what happened early this morning has been expected and most unfortunate that no peaceful resolution of the problem has been reached. And it makes people in this part of the world very unhappy and resentful.
What kind of reaction do you expect from Jordanians?
Well, Jordanians are definitely they were expecting this, as I told you, and I was actually expecting it myself. And they will definitely be very unhappy about the whole situation. And the Jordanians and many Arabs look at the problem this way. They see a strong, young Arab country, Iraq, defiant, emerging from 8 years of war with Iran and promoting nationalism and patriotism. And it gave hope to the Arabs. And it is not that the Arabs are condoning their annexation of Kuwait or things of the sort. And many people don't approve of that. And especially Jordan and the King say they never accepted or condoned the annexation of Kuwait by Iraq.
Is that hope dead now?
Well, it is not. The Arabs generally, especially in this part of the world, have seen for decades, they have been living in a state of frustration, disappointment, humiliation, unhappiness. They see the growth of Israel in arrogance and power. We have engaged ourselves in 4 wars with them, and we have been defeated. We see the influx of Soviet Jews to Israel to give them more power and therefore taste for expansion and further desperation. And we see tens of thousands or millions of displaced Arabs in the diaspora who live, some of them, in the most miserable conditions. And Iraq gave those people hope. And they see the United States and its allies are trying to assassinate and kill that hope.
Many Jordanians have said they're now willing to go and fight for Saddam Hussein, to fight for the Iraqis. Will that happen?
I believe so. I mean, the general feeling is that they see this episode as a determined effort by the United States and its allies to frustrate and assassinate that hope among the Arabs. It is not that they condone the occupation of Kuwait. It is simply Iraq gave them hope. That hope could be misguided, could be false, could be exaggerated, but it gave them that hope. And they see the American administration and their allies trying and working very hard to destroy that hope.
Saddam Hussein said one of his first targets, in fact his first target, would be Israel. We haven't seen any evidence of that yet, but do you think that will happen? Do you think it will be possible to keep Israel out of this war?
Well, in the early hours, we don't see the impact of the first raids on Iraq, and we haven't seen yet any reaction from Iraq regarding this attack, and we have to wait and see. But the bitterness in this part of the world is not because they approve of the occupation of Kuwait. It is they
see it is the American administration is fulfilling the desires and wishes of the Israelis to have this area downgraded, helpless, powerless.
Thank you very much, Senator Mohammed Kamal.
Thank you.
This is Doug James reporting live for CNN in Amman, Jordan.
Now we go to Benjamin Netanyahu standing by, I believe, in Jerusalem. We may have lost the transmission there at this point in time. So, monitoring the events throughout the evening from our State Department is World Affairs correspondent Ralph Begleiter. Ralph?
Catherine, I can tell you that Secretary of State James Baker engaged in one last round of diplomacy today before the attack on Baghdad began, but it was not diplomacy aimed at achieving a settlement. It was diplomacy aimed at simply giving notification to a lot of countries who were participating in the strategy against Saddam Hussein and others who were on the periphery of things. Baker spoke with the new Soviet Foreign Minister Alexander Beshmetnik, who is in Moscow at the moment. And he also spoke with met with here at the State Department the Saudi ambassador, the Israeli ambassador, the Kuwaiti, the German ambassador, the ambassador from Syria, and from Japan. There were a whole slew of telephone calls that went out, diplomatic phone calls to inform a lot of other countries, including the NATO alliance, the Netherlands, the Foreign Minister of Luxembourg, who happens to chair the European community at this period of time, as well as the leadership of the congressional committees to which Baker reports as the Secretary of State, the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives. A new travel advisory was issued here by the State Department.
Ralph, let me interrupt you for just a moment. We do have now the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, standing by. Mr. Foreign Minister, are you there?
Yes, I can hear you.
We understand earlier, of course, a national emergency was declared in Israel. What is the status of events there now?
Well, as you know, Israel is not involved in this conflict, but we follow the events very closely. We wish the American and coalition forces Godspeed and full success in achieving their mission, and we hope that they'll come home safely, all of them, and quickly.
Have you received any reports about possible destruction of Iraqi missiles along the western border?
Well, we heard the statements that have come through various communication lines, the news media, and so on. But this is very early on in the operations. We are waiting, like everyone else, I believe like the American government, for precise reports following the accomplishment of the mission.
Has the alert status therein, your country, diminished at all given these first waves of bombings?
No, we have long experience in this, and we know that this is, we've listened to the American statement that this could be a long engagement. We have made the preparations for our population. We've asked them to take certain precautions, asked the people to stay in their homes for the moment. So we have not relaxed our state of alert, but we follow things, as I said, very closely and wish the American and other forces full success.
Well, as morning has come to Israel, what steps will you take now in regard to the population, notifying them about events?
They're all notified. Our communication lines, our television, our radio are now broadcasting instructions to the people basically to stay home or around their homes. The schools, as you know, are closed. We have now basically taken the gas masks out of their kits, so people are ready just in case something does happen. We hope that it won't, but we're ready if it will.
And what about the status of the Israeli military, the alert status at present?
Well, the military is ready for any contingency. We hope that none will be necessary.
What about the reaction of the Palestinians in the territories? Are you worried at all about that?
Well, we did hear some communiques from the Intifada leadership that is directed by the PLO to side with Saddam Hussein, to attack Israeli targets and so on, and to use the opportunity of the crisis to do so. We've said to the Palestinian population at large, not to these handful of insiders and terrorists, that we will protect them. But we will, of course, take action against those who will violate it. So far, we've not really had to.
Mr. Netanyahu, thank you for joining us, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel. Luke?